Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for Stories of Scholarship and Leadership Highlighting Women Faculty at Notre Dame. I am Colleen Bailey. I'm on the National Board for Notre Dame Women Connect, and we're co-sponsoring this event. So I'm very excited to be here with these ladies in my capacity as a member of that board. So, in case you aren't aware, for the last 3 years on International Women's Day, Notre Dame has highlighted female scholars from each of our schools and colleges in an online feature called Women Lead. We have 3 of those highlighted faculty here with us today to share a little bit more about their stories and about their work. I'm going to have them go ahead and introduce themselves.
Well, good morning. I'm Jen Mason McAward. I graduated from Notre Dame in 1994. And then I did the Holy Cross Associates program, which was run out of Notre Dame. And then I went to NYU Law School, practiced in Washington, D.C. for several years, and then came back to Notre Dame, where I teach in the law school. I'm a professor there, and I also direct the Center for Civil and Human Rights. And my work, my research focuses kind of broadly on how constitutional civil rights get enforced. So how do the courts and Congress talk to each other? How do the courts and kind of local government entities talk with each other, and kind of how do we optimize enforcement of civil rights?
I'm Crislyn de Souza Shorey. I am a scientist, and I'm part of the College of Science in the biology department. I study cells, and I also study cell dysfunction in the context of cancer. By way of background, I grew up in Bombay, India, and came to the United States to do my doctoral work, and did so at the University of Texas, and then did a postdoctoral fellowship, which is akin to a residency for an MD program, at Washington University School of Medicine, and then joined Notre Dame as an assistant professor, moved through the ranks, and I am presently the department chair.
I'm Kristen Collett-Schmitt. I'm an associate teaching professor of finance in the Mendoza College of Business and the director of special projects in the dean's office. I have my undergraduate degree in economics and sociology from Bellarmine University. It's in Louisville, Kentucky. And then I did my master's and PhD in economics at North Carolina State University in Raleigh, North Carolina. I have been at Notre Dame now for 10 years, and during those 10 years, I primarily have been teaching microeconomics in the undergraduate program in Mendoza, as well as the executive MBA and the Masters of Nonprofit Administration program. And essentially, all of my students are non-majors in economics, so my focus has really been on trying to prove the value of my discipline to these non-majors. And so as a result, most of my research focuses on economics education and the scholarship of teaching and learning. And I also care a lot and focus a lot on financial literacy. So as such, I'm also the faculty advisor for the University Chapter of MoneyThink. We send our undergraduate students out to local high schools in South Bend, and the students themselves teach the high school students, financial literacy skills that they're often lacking. So I'm really happy to be here today. Thank you.
So I've got a few questions that I've prepared to get the conversation started this morning, but we definitely would encourage you all to ask questions as well. So we have set aside some time for that at the end, but if a follow-up question is something that one of them says is just burning at the moment, go ahead and throw your hand up and we'll throw it over to you. So, let's see, Crislyn, how do you describe the technical elements of your research to non-scientists?
So like I said, I study cells. And in particular, we're interested in looking at how components of cells make their way to its appropriate location. And when this goes awry, cells don't function like they should, and that can lead to all kinds of abnormalities. So, like I said, we've been studying this in the context of cancers. So we're interested how these changes occur in tumor cells, They have altered phenotypes. The way things come into cells and the way things leave cells are altered in cancers, and that's what my lab studies. And we've done a lot of foundational work to understand some of the mechanisms involved, but what has been particularly exciting is that in recent past, a lot of our foundational work we've found that we've been able to translate. And so we are readying this for translation into the clinic.
Jen, you worked for Justice Sandra Day O'Connor in 2000-2001 as a clerk, right? What impact has that experience had on your career since?
So for those who are not in the law world, when a person graduates from law school, one of the jobs available to her is to serve as a law clerk. Neither of my parents were lawyers, and so when I told them I was going to serve as a law clerk, they were horrified because they thought it involved just filing papers. But what it is it's a wonderful job where a young lawyer works intimately with a judge and helps the judge research cases and draft opinions and kind of learns the judicial craft. And I was very privileged to do that with Justice Sandra Day O'Connor a couple years after I graduated from law school, which is still amazing to me. I'm just this kid from Cleveland, Ohio, and the fact that I got to spend a year working with her is just a great gift. I learned many things from her, but I think kind of boiled down, like she is great at balancing things, right? So in the law world, she's either praised or maligned for her willingness to kind of see nuance and craft balancing tests that kind of deal with life as it's lived. In her own life, she balanced starting a young family. She graduated from law school, second in her class at Stanford, just behind William Rehnquist, who had become the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, but no law firm would hire her. So she wound up going home to Arizona, finding a job in a prosecutor's office, but pretty quickly starting a family. She and her husband were very civically minded, but she really kind of had stages of her life where she would balance a commitment to family and a commitment to professional development and a desire to be involved in her community, and ultimately she winds up on the Supreme Court. But she is just a great example and role model to me of how to balance those different parts of your life, how to take that concept of balance and bring it into the law and see that life is a nuanced thing and that law needs to respond in a nuanced way. So I feel very, very fortunate to know her.
Kristen, in the Women Lead article, you mentioned 3 life-defining experiences, times where things didn't look like they were going to work out. Can you tell us about one of those experiences and how it's impacted you now?
Sure. Probably the number one life-changing experience for me was the death of my daughter, 8 years ago from yesterday, actually. I gave birth to twin identical girls, and one of them was stillborn. And essentially my response to that experience was that I thought my life was over, right? Her twin did survive, my daughter Harper, turned 8 yesterday. She was born 7 weeks early, spent about 16 days in the hospital, just growing and getting stronger. But kind of seeing her having to fight for her life and then losing a daughter, again, just maybe kind of change this perspective that I have on life. And so one way that my husband and I started to kind of deal with the grief of losing a child was to start our own nonprofit in the community. And so when my daughter was first able to wear clothes after being on wires and devices for so many days, they wanted to put her in clothes and we had nothing. She weighed 4 pounds, right? Nothing fit her at that time. And so we found out that the nurses in the hospitals were actually going out and buying all these clothes for the kids themselves, using their own money to buy these clothes for these babies. And so we thought, why not buy the clothes that we would have bought for our own daughter, Mackenzie, for these babies in the NICU? And so we made purchases ourselves. We started collecting clothes from friends and family, and then eventually it grew into a nonprofit that we call Wishes for Preemies, where we tried to provide these necessities plus others for the NICU in the area. And to be honest, I feel very open talking about this experience, especially with my students, because a lot of the time students come into my office and say, look, I got a C on this exam. And I feel like I'm not going to get into, graduate school, or not going to get a job, and I feel like my life is over. And I say, it doesn't have to be over. And I kind of freely share my experience with them to show them how, you can move on and you can grow from these experiences that you once thought meant that, you couldn't move on.
That's great perspective to be able to share with people who it seems like they live and die on their grades.
Exactly, yeah.
Speaking of sharing perspective, Crislyn, you mentioned multiple mentors that you've had throughout your coming up. Can you elaborate on a couple of those mentor relationships, and have you been able to pay it forward by taking on any of your own mentees?
So, yeah, I think I've been blessed with mentors, throughout my life. And one of the things I mentioned in my article, so right from childhood, I think my parents were terrific mentors. They both, none of them they're not scientists, but they always encouraged my love for science. And from them I've learned, I learned a lot of things about the importance of education, and they worked hard. They, balanced dual careers. And it was not a common thing, particularly in Bombay at that time, so many years ago, where, the woman often stayed at home during her childbearing years. And, but my, parents were able to, balance things well, and they also were very engaged with the community. I remember them taking part in, Parents Teachers Associations and in being involved in a lot of nonprofit organizations, being part of the, the parish council, for, helping, bring in scholarships for underprivileged children. And I remember my father, working with youth, and particularly, older youth that had were in some sort of trouble or the other, helping them with placements, job placements and such. So I think from them I learned things like, empathy and, the community engagement, the importance of it, living within your means, all those types of things that I think helped me both in my personal and professional life until today. And then even in college and later on, I think I've always had professors that I've been able to, they've been just terrific in terms of, been great mentors in shepherding me in ways that have channeled my career path. So my pre-doctoral and my postdoctoral advisors were both department heads, interestingly. So they were both chairs of departments. I find myself in the same, in the same role now. But they were outstanding scientists, and I think one of the things that I learned from them, they provided their students with a lot of independence, and but they also, always fostered creative thought and scientific debate that really allowed, their mentees and to grow and to sort of express their own, individuality. And I like to think I pay it forward by, facilitating that with the students I work with, both graduate students as well as undergrads. A common thing, a common thread with all of the mentors has always been, I have felt that they've placed a lot of faith and confidence in me. And so, and that was impetus for me to push myself to achieve more. And I try and do that with my students as well. And I think especially now in my current role, I feel this is amplified in a bigger way, because now we're looking at, a full department, I think one of the largest departments at Notre Dame, and we're looking at program development and, remodeling the curriculum to make it innovative and cutting edge. And so it's just that multiplier effect that's very rewarding. And, I think I'm facilitating that, and that's been, so I'd like to think I'm paying it forward. I hope I am.
I wasn't calling that into question. Jen, you said that the motivation behind your work is to advance the cause of human dignity. Do you have any suggestions for individuals as to how we can do that in the course of our daily lives?
I'd be open to suggestions too. It's not like I do that wonderfully well. I mean, it just seems to me that the key is kind of awareness or mindfulness of how what you do affects other people, right? So when you focus on finance and you think about how do I kind of promote financial literacy for kids in our community, or when you work in a lab and you think about how can my cellular research on cancer affect people in the medical clinical setting, or when you're a lawyer thinking about how does the kind of historical research I do or the kind of doctrinal stuff that I teach in the classroom affect the lives of real people. And I think that takes you a long way from kind of thinking about your own world to thinking outside of yourself. And so one thing I do in the classroom, for example, is, in law school you read cases, Marbury versus Madison or X versus Y. And I do the research and I tell my students, well, here's who Mrs. X was, and here's the story of what happened to her. And here's who Mrs. Y was, and here's the story of what happened to her. And let's think about kind of what we do in an academic setting in terms of how it impacts the lives of real people. And so again, that's just helping students think outside themselves and think about how whatever they're studying might touch on the dignity of each human person, and how can we kind of maximize that as we do our work here at Notre Dame.
Easier said than done.
Absolutely. As I said, I don't do it perfectly by any stretch.
Kristen, as an alumna of Bellarmine University, you didn't go through the same brainwashing as I did, for example. What's your opinion of Notre Dame when you first joined the Notre Dame family and how it's developed?
So interestingly, the president of Bellarmine University, the late Joseph McGowan, was actually an alum of Notre Dame. He actually got his bachelor's and master's from Notre Dame. And so what he would always say when he was giving these public addresses is that he dreamed for one day Bellarmine would be the Notre Dame of the South. So I don't think I'm as removed from it as you might think I was. And of course I can see why, that was his dream. Now that I'm here, Bellarmine is a long way to go, but I can certainly see why that was the goal of President McGowan. When I came here, I came from a very small, close-knit community in greater Cincinnati. Notre Dame always had this appeal. It was a dream to many people that lived in my hometown. And so, when I arrived on a snowy day in February for my interview driving down Notre Dame Avenue, I was totally overwhelmed to see that dome in front of me. It was very intimidating. But what I tell my students when I introduce myself to them is it's my first job out of graduate school, and then I hope it is my only job ever. And that is just because I think mostly because of the sense of community that I feel here. I did not graduate from Notre Dame, but yet I feel like I'm such an integral part of that community despite that. And I do think that one of the big reasons why I feel that so strongly was the birth of my daughters. I think that the Mendoza community specifically have been one of the biggest group of supporters in my life. For our nonprofit, for example, our colleagues are constantly donating and asking how it's going. And even through the loss of a child, to have the support, even from the dean, calling me up, checking on me and seeing how I was doing. I mean, that's something that you don't get from a lot of places. And so obviously I feel like I'm blessed to be here. So.
We're blessed to have you. Thanks. At this point, I want to make sure that I'm not missing any questions that you all have. Does anyone have anything they'd like to ask any of these ladies? Go ahead.
What do you think the most important policy that you might try and influence politics would be from your professional aspects?
Oh, I guess I should repeat the question.
So it's just trying to, from your perspective, influence the greater world around you, in particular political leaders, what do you think is the most important priority that you think is attainable, I guess, in the next 5 years?
So the question was, what's the most important policy that can be influenced by your work?
More funding for scientific research. Well, it's true. I mean, I think it, you know, it's, and to make it something that's not just always based on profit. So things like rare diseases or, you know, diseases that affect the third world, global health. I mean, I think these are all wonderful causes, and you know, just given what I do, and I think political leaders could make a huge difference.
Just going along with that, I think that, you know, Mendoza was founded with the mission of, you know, business should be done as a force for good. So, you know, while, you know, profit, of course, is a focus of literally everything that I teach, I think that through our students, we can, you know, reach a greater good through the reminder that it's more than that. I mean, that's pretty similar to what you were saying.
The thing I love about my job is that I don't have to focus on the politics of any particular question, but I view my role as teaching students about values and priorities, right? So from my perspective, I want every student who comes through Notre Dame to be focused on questions of civil rights and human dignity, or human rights and human dignity. And how does that play out in the political system? Well, I don't know, but I think it's important that people think about racial justice and police violence. And once you make that a priority of thinking about it and studying it and talking about it, then kind of the politics will fall where they are. But at least our job is to kind of form students with kind of certain priorities and values, and then it can cash out in the world in whatever way they see fit.
When I was a student here 40 years ago, the ratio of men to women was 6-to-1. So now it's 50-50, right? And my question is, you know, like in the country, like in the world, you know, the racism hasn't gone away. You know, ageism hasn't gone away. What about sexism? Is that still an issue here? Do you have to deal with that, or is there an inequality between the way the women and the men are treated? That's my question.
Yeah, I think in economics specifically, women are definitely the minority. I was one of 5 women in my PhD program when I entered in 2003. I didn't have one single female professor in my graduate program. And even in Mendoza now, we do have female faculty, but it's definitely the minority. And I think for me particularly, where this issue is the most apparent is in student evaluations. So I'm a teaching professor here. Teaching evaluations are a core part of how I'm evaluated, and it's a crucial part to how I define my success in what I do. And just empirically, there's all this research that there's this bias against women in just these teaching evaluations. Just this week I was at a conference on economics education, and there was an experiment where a professor gave, a group of professors, male and female, gave their students a survey, once at the beginning of the semester, once after a first exam was given back, bad information potentially about a grade, and then at the end of the exam, or end of the semester. And at that second point in time where they took this survey and they evaluated their professors, not only did the female faculty rate lower than the men, but their ratings dropped significantly for the females. And this has a lot to do with the fact that, in general, women are expected to be kinder, more caring, more available to their students. So when they deliver a bad grade to their students, they often come across as being more harsh than, say, a male counterpart. And so this bias is an issue, I think, where I feel that my gender is playing a role. And so Notre Dame has been really good about recognizing that this bias is present in our evaluations. But I don't think our students, as exceptional as they are, I don't think that they are immune to this. I do think that they often show this bias. For example, in my evaluations, I often get the comment that I don't look like an econ professor, whatever that means. And when the semester I was pregnant, I was told on my evaluations, why aren't you at home just reading What to Expect While Expecting instead of being here in the classroom? And so those were all very shocking to me, but it just shows that there is this bias that we see empirically, right? But it's also kind of present. And I think it might be, I mean, it's true in all disciplines, but in economics I feel it a lot, just because women just in the faculty are a minority. They get promoted less everywhere. It's hard to get tenure in that discipline when you're female. So that's been my experience so far. Yeah.
So I think one of the things that, the point that was raised is it's important to have more role models. You need women in leadership positions. And I think that's one of the reasons it was part of the reason why I was felt encouraged to serve in a leadership role, in my department. And I think I felt fairly confident that, the dean and my colleagues wanted me to take on this role because of what I bring to the job rather than they wanted to fill it with their first women chair. And I've always thought of myself as a scientist who happens to be a woman. And I've been very comfortable with that. And I think personally, I've been very comfortable at Notre Dame. I've been on the faculty now for close to 20 years. And but that doesn't mean to say that several of my female colleagues haven't felt bias. And I think one of the things that I've tried to draw attention to, particularly as the chair of the department, is implicit bias. So it's sort of these unconscious thoughts and the stereotyping that goes on. And it doesn't, it's when you're evaluating candidates for, where you're hiring faculty or whether you are, evaluating students for fellowships. I think that's something that is, I've drawn attention to, and literally we've had retreats where we've discussed this openly as a faculty to make sure. And I think when people are just aware, I've encouraged people to take the implicit bias tests. And so sometimes just being aware of what your implicit biases are, I think goes a long way in terms of trying to circumvent those issues when they do come up.
I've been fortunate to have many great role models who are women at Notre Dame. Both of my deans since I've been here at the law school have been women. So there's no shortage of mentors. But when you look at Notre Dame, it's still a white male institution. And so I think that, Father John and his team are aware of that problem. I think they're very committed to finding creative ways to change literally the complexion of Notre Dame. But I still think we have a long way to go. And so it's not for lack of good faith or goodwill. I think we're just kind of starting in a hole, and I think they're doing what they can, but it's going to take us a long time. But I think that part of it is kind of highlighting women faculty or kind of, bringing women into leadership positions across the university. And, I think over time that will bear fruit, but I think it's going to be a longer road than we care to acknowledge.
What is each of your proudest professional/academic accomplishments to date? I'm sure there are many more.
I feel so fortunate to be the director of the Center for Civil and Human Rights. It was founded more than 40 years ago by Father Ted Hesburgh. While he was at Notre Dame as the president, he did many things, one of which was he was a founding member of the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, which did incredibly important work. They basically wrote the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And when I say they, I mean he. He literally did it and got the committee to come along with him. And so ultimately he was fired by President Nixon. He insisted on criticizing the Nixon administration's commitment to diversity and came back to Notre Dame and said Notre Dame should be the place for kind of intellectual rigor attached to the civil rights movement. And so for me to be a part of that legacy and for me to have a role in building up educational programs and programming and research focused on civil and human rights issue is just it's a real gift and a real privilege to do. And to do that kind of in the footsteps of Father Ted makes it even more special for me.
I love being a scientist. I love doing research. I could, do it for the rest of my life and be happy. And, and so every time we, publish something with high impact that I know can translate for societal good, it's just very rewarding and very gratifying. And, and like I said, this multiplier effect by, serving as department chair and, sort of developing our programs is just very rewarding as well. And I think I look at our department and I feel like our intellectual foundation is strong. Our students and our faculty, are doing just wonderful things that are making a difference. And so, such an accomplishment, just, as a group and as a department, and I feel, very gratified to be part of it.
I think for me, the greatest achievement professionally has been my development of an online course in Mendoza. So I think we're a little hesitant to embrace technology in this way since we know how special and important it is to be on this campus and learning here rather than virtually. But I did receive a grant from the Office of Digital Learning on campus. We developed a fully online course for the undergrads. It was the very first in Mendoza. And what we do in the class is we actually hold live sessions. So I still had that face-to-face interaction with students through a video conferencing software. We do everything in the class that we would do in my face-to-face class, like presentations and discussions and group work and pretty traditional lecture. And then they have all these series of asynchronous work that they do also, like watching these videos that we professionally produce out of the Office of Digital Learning, where we have interviews with experts, simulations, and case studies. So why I'm proud of this is one is that I wasn't afraid to embrace the technology. I mean, I was afraid at first, but I mean, with the help of the Office of Digital Learning, we created this really amazing product. And then secondly, what it allows our students in Mendoza to do is actually work at their traditional internships in New York and Chicago, do these amazing things in their summer work, and then in the evening take these summer classes. It gets them ahead so they can then study abroad in the fall and spring. They can add a second major. They can do service work. They can do all these other things that are interesting and important to them, and not just worry about cramming in all those course requirements. And the class has been really popular in that sense that it allows the students to do all those things simultaneously without losing what they love about taking classes here at Notre Dame.
Congratulations. With the many degrees that we have sitting up here in these chairs, you all have had numerous professors. Are there any particularly memorable professors you've had or good stories from that side of the podium?
I had a female professor in econ as an undergrad who, she was an economist, researcher, great teacher. She was a mom. So she taught me I could do it all. So definitely I've modeled my life and career after her. A little bit different, but still very important to me. I had a professor in grad school who failed me on my microeconomics comprehensive exam. So memorable for a different reason, but memorable nonetheless. And micro is my thing. I thought I had aced it, and he said I aced it except I said too much. Basically, I did like a brain dump, which I thought what a comprehensive exam was about, but he wanted me to do better. He wanted me to hone my skills and show what I knew specifically, and he held me to a higher standard. And so I was going to drop out of grad school after that, and I didn't. I stuck with it because he encouraged me to do that. And of course, that moment of failure also was very life-changing for me as well. So.
For me, I had a wonderful female professor in law school who was just a great role model for me. She basically got me through law school. But thinking back to my time at Notre Dame, I had so many great professors, from George Lopez teaching me international relations, to Sat Barber, who was the first person who exposed me to constitutional law. I minored in theology. I majored in government and international relations. I minored in theology, and I feel like so many of my theology professors just exposed me to a deeper level of faith and thinking about my faith that was really transformative for me. So, I mean, I could list them, but it was just a great gift to work with all those people in the theology department.
I'll throw it out to the audience again. Anyone else have questions?
So I work at an investment management firm in Chicago, and I'm currently in the process of starting up like a diversity and inclusion council at firms who don't have anything right now. And it's a fact that we have a problem because we have very, very few female leaders. And in fact, like on our research and our investment team, we have none. So I guess I'm wondering, I know you guys mentioned a few things like implicit bias training and kind of where it comes from the leadership, but what do you feel like Notre Dame actively does to attract and retain female leaders?
So I can tell you, I just went through a program this year called ND Lead. It's run out of the Provost's office, and it's for people who are kind of coming into or just assumed leadership positions at various places on campus. So some department chairs or some associate deans or new directors of centers, men and women alike. And we just finished, and I said to the director of the program, we learned lots of wonderful stuff about ourselves and how we might interact with people and nitty-gritty stuff about how to run an effective meeting. But I think that the fact that we were identified as kind of promising leaders on campus, like that one fact went a long way in developing us as leaders, because it builds our own confidence by showing that somebody else has confidence in me. And so I think even the initial steps that you're taking to kind of perhaps identify a new generation of leaders is just going to go a long way in kind of building up that cadre. So bravo to you.
And I think the mentorship that's already been mentioned, if it's possible to put someone in a leadership position that's a female, I think it may take time to do that, but that itself will be very productive, especially for the younger females that come into the firm.
And you've seen that recently. I mean, I think over the past few years, there are just a lot more women leaders on campus. So, in the provost's office, more female deans. The dean of the College of Science is a female now, and so it's. I think when I remember the first department chair retreat I went to. I think I was one of 2 women in this room. And now there are more women, and so and I think the ND Lead program has contributed to that. I mean, I've served on some of the panels for ND Lead, and I see a lot of women in the room, and I think that's really gratifying. So I think faculty who are being put forward I think there's this conscious effort to include more women, and or faculty that offer diversity, or both.
I think also something to mention is providing an environment where women who may feel like a bias or not being included for some reason have the opportunity to say something. So not being afraid to say, I feel like I'm not getting this opportunity just because I'm a female, or if this could happen, I would feel better about participating. So providing a more of a welcoming environment or community where people can speak freely without the threat or the fear of being punished in some way that's so hard to do, but I think that would also be helpful.
Dolly, it looks like you're thinking.
Oh, I'm loving it.
So we've heard a little bit about Kristen's journey as a mother, but I would love, you're all mothers. I would love to hear if there's any lessons you've learned from motherhood that have served you well in the classroom, or vice versa.
Well, I mean, I think it just it provides you perspective. So, I actually had my son right after tenure. And so, I've seen it both ways, where, there was a period when I went through being on the faculty with not having a child, and then with a child. And I can say, having a child puts a lot of things into perspective, particularly sometimes when you're dealing with students. But all in all, I mean, I think what has, if I could, turn that question around a little bit, oftentimes I have students have conversations with me where they ask, how do you balance, being a mother and then also, being a faculty member and then taking on the department chair role, so being and I think to me it's like it every day sort of presents you a choice. You make a choice, and to prioritize and to see what's important at any given day or time, and so sometimes it just means that you have to you take on your role as a mother because it takes priority, and sometimes it's when you your role as a department chair, and sometimes it's when you are a faculty member, and so you have you just have to prioritize, and you have a choice to see what needs to be done at any given time.
So I have 4 young daughters, and every month I volunteer in their lunchroom once a month at their school. And a couple months ago I was there, and my 3rd grader was sitting at a table with some friends, and I see them laughing and pointing for me to come over, and a young boy said to me, "Your daughter says that you work at Notre Dame." I'm like, "I do." He was like, "Really? Well, what do you do? Do you carry water bottles for the football team?" And he thought he was just the most hilarious person on earth. He was cracking up. And I was really stunned by this. And my daughter responded to him, and she said, "No, my mom is a professor. She has students, and she runs a center. She has employees. She does all kinds of stuff at Notre Dame." And at that moment, I feel like the victory had been won, and I walked away, because I am modeling for my daughters what a working mother can look like, right? You can be proud of your accomplishments at work. You can be proud of her mom when she's wiping the tables down at the end of lunch. And so the fact that my daughter was able to defend me in that way was just a huge victory for me. And so I think that having kids, you have to prioritize, and sometimes kids take priority, and sometimes work takes priority. And at the end of the day, if you feel like you can model for your children what it means to have a full life, that's the victory you're looking for. And do I do it right all the time? Absolutely not.
And I feel like I'm modeling for my students in the same way. There have been times when I have to bring my daughter to office hours or to a study session because I just have no choice. I remember the semester she was born, my husband had the flu, and I had like a night study session, so I had to strap my daughter to my chest, and I carry her, and I lectured for 2 hours, and thankfully she did not cry one bit. But I just think that the more I integrate my family life into my work life, the more of a role model I can be for my students. And I really think that my daughter makes me more popular with my students every time they see her. They like to see that I'm human in that way. And then not to mention that I feel that as a mother and as a professor, I'm just a teacher in both instances. And so sometimes things I do in the classroom carry over to how I teach my daughter. So interestingly.
You give her lectures?
Yeah, no. I'm gonna get her to be an economist. That's gonna be my thing.
When did you all realize what you wanted your course of study to be, your field of study?
Go ahead.
I think for me, teaching came before the econ part. When I was in college, I actually tutored a lot, and I at one point tutored a Paralympic athlete from Nigeria, and that was really important, like a really important experience for me because he was like so thirsty for learning and understanding, and he was so thankful for the impact I was making on him, and that just really inspired me to want to teach. And so then when I was in grad school, I automatically was a TA my very first semester, and I think teaching while I was becoming an expert in the field at the same time, then just kind of everything developed into a passion at that point. It was really just interaction with students that really made me realize that.
I think I knew I wanted to be a scientist ever since I was little. It was one of my favorite things. It was either that or, I don't know, be a historian or something, and because I liked history too. And but I think I had opportunities, and I think professors, again, it's great, teachers and professors that, create opportunities, and one thing led to another, and this was, just the path that was destined, I guess.
Yeah, I can't claim that I had kind of the early certainty. I mean, mine is more of a just kind of follow the Holy Spirit where it leads you and do that. So I wasn't sure if I should go to law school. I went to law school. I wasn't sure if I wanted to practice law. And I was trying to get career advice from the dean of Notre Dame Law School, who we had a friend in common, and she offered me a job to come teach at Notre Dame Law School, and I laughed at her. I was like, I can't teach. I don't know that, why would I move to South Bend? And I don't think I can teach. And it turns out that, you think about it, the Holy Spirit plants a seed, and I called her back. I kind of groveled a little bit and said, all right, can I take you up on it? And it turns out that that's where I was meant to be all the time. Like, I was meant to be a teacher. That's my vocation. I was meant to be a teacher here. I love being here. And it's not because I had any grand plan. It's just because you kind of remain open to possibility, and then life leads you where you're supposed to be.
Very encouraging for someone who may not know their direction. But yeah, thank you all for being here, and thank you ladies very much for being here.
Great stuff.
And good luck with the rest of your work.
Thank you.